A young woman was found dead in her own apartment. The police began an investigation, but they were unable to find any evidence. It took a whole 40 years before there was finally a breakthrough in the case. However, along with the truth, the detectives also uncovered new disturbing facts. Robin Brooks was born on March 30, 1960, in the state of Virginia, USA. As a child, she moved with her family to the small town of Highland, located in New York State. Robin was a cheerful and sociable person, had many friends, and always knew how to find common ground with people. She also had an older sister, Maria, with whom the girl was very close. After school, Robin decided to move to California. Besides the state's appealing climate, the girl had another significant reason for the move. Shortly before, her sister had also moved there, and Robin decided to follow her. The girl rented an apartment in Sacramento and found a job there. A few months later, she had the opportunity to move into a residential complex where her sister lived with her boyfriend. Besides the fact that the apartments were significantly better, Robin could spend more time with Maria. And shortly before her 20th birthday, she decided to move. The girl rented a separate apartment, and to pay the rent, she had to take on 2 jobs. One of them was as a cashier at a donut shop located just a few meters from her residential complex. Robin chose the evening shift to combine it with her second job. The girl lived in this complex for about a month and a half, and during that time, she managed to make many friends both at work and beyond. She was also pleased with the opportunity to see her sister every day. On April 24, 1980, Robin was supposed to start her shift at the donut shop at 4 p.m. However, to her colleagues' surprise, the girl never showed up. This was very strange, as she had never missed her shifts before and often arrived even earlier than scheduled. The employees waited a few hours and eventually one of them decided to walk to Robin's apartment. The colleague knocked on her door, but there was only silence in response. After several unsuccessful attempts, he returned to the store and reported that the girl was not responding. The colleagues were deeply troubled by this fact. They assumed something might have happened to Robin. Otherwise, she would have definitely called and explained why she couldn't come to work. In the short time she had spent at their store, the girl had become friends with all the employees, and they were seriously worried about her. The colleagues thought about calling the police but quickly realized that the law enforcement would not start looking for Robin just because she missed a work shift. Then, one of them proposed a not-so-standard solution. A man volunteered to unlock the entrance door of her apartment to find out if everything was okay with her. He went to her home with other employees. The colleagues knocked on the door for a few minutes and ultimately decided to break in. When they managed to do so, they were greeted by a shocking scene. Robin was lying on her waterbed in the living room, surrounded by blood. The colleagues immediately called the police, and the officers who arrived confirmed that the woman was dead. Her body bore multiple stab wounds. Apparently, an unknown assailant had attacked her with a knife, puncturing the water mattress several times in the process, causing its contents to spill onto the floor. Upon examining the crime scene, the police determined that the front door showed no signs of forced entry until it was opened by the victim's colleagues. The back door was also locked from the inside. From this, they inferred that the killer had entered the apartment through a window. Soon, forensic experts found confirmation of this theory by discovering fingerprints on the windowsill. Medical experts determined that the victim had been subjected to violence and extracted biological material from the perpetrator. In the apartment, small traces of blood were also found that did not match Robin's blood type. Detectives believed that the killer had cut himself during the attack, and blood samples were sent to the laboratory. Unfortunately, DNA analysis was not available in the 1980s, so they could not use these clues. Investigators began questioning the victim's acquaintances, starting with her colleagues. They said that the day before, the girl had finished her shift at midnight and went home. She was in a great mood, joked, and behaved as usual. Nothing at that moment seemed to foreshadow trouble. The colleagues added an interesting fact. That day, Robin had said she had washed her bedding before going to her shift and was worried whether it would dry by her return. The bed in the victim's apartment was not made, leading detectives to conclude that the killer attacked her almost immediately after she returned home. Her sister also shared something troubling. A few days before her death, Robin mentioned that a certain man was stalking her. She did not reveal any details about this person that could identify him. The girl only said that he repeatedly came to her store and behaved quite strangely, trying to win her over. However, he did nothing that could make Robin worried for her safety, so she did not take the situation seriously. The police were unable to identify this man, as they had no description of him. They continued the investigation, spoke with the victim's neighbors, but here too, they failed to find any leads. None of them heard screams or sounds of a struggle that night. The neighbors also did not see anyone unfamiliar visiting the girl. In addition to this, investigators learned that on the night of her murder, Robin didn't go home right after work. She stopped by a party at her acquaintances, stayed with them for a while, and soon left. According to the acquaintances, she headed home alone. No conflicts or strange situations occurred at the party. The police spoke with everyone present and concluded that they were likely not related to her murder. Ultimately, the detectives hit a dead end. They didn't have a single potential suspect. Robin got along well with her neighbors and colleagues. She didn't have a boyfriend or people from her past who might wish her harm. Blood and biological material could not lead them to the murder at the time, and fingerprint comparison with existing databases yielded no results. Investigators believed the murderer was the obsessive store visitor Robin had mentioned. They theorized that the man followed the victim from work to her home, learning her exact address. On another day, he sneaked into her apartment through a window while she was at the store and waited. When Robin came home, he attacked her, subjected her to violence, killed her, and then fled. Despite the complete lack of evidence, the investigation continued for some time until it finally stalled. It was only resumed in 2004, 24 years after the murder. By that time, DNA analysis had become widely used, and detectives hoped that this technology would help them find the criminal. They sent the blood and biological material to the lab, and experts extracted a DNA profile. It was uploaded to the FBI database, but no matches were found. This meant that the murderer had not been convicted of serious crimes, or had happened before the mandatory collection of DNA from such criminals. However, a troubling discovery awaited the investigators in the California state database. The DNA profile of the murderer matched another crime that occurred 3 weeks before Robin's death. An unknown man broke into another woman's home, subjected her to violence, and fled, leaving the victim alive. It all happened at night, and the woman didn't see the perpetrator's face. Right after that, she called the police, and medical experts were able to extract the biological material of this man. Detectives tried to find new leads in this case to finally identify Robin's killer, but all attempts led to a dead end. Eventually, the case went cold again. The only thing left for investigators was to periodically check the profile against databases, in case the murderer came to the police's attention and his DNA was added. This continued until 2017. Throughout all this time, the police didn't find any new leads until detectives heard about a new method called DNA phenotyping. This technique involves genetic experts studying a DNA sample and compiling a rough portrait of the suspect based on their interpretation of the data. This method is not exact and serves more as an auxiliary guide for the police. With such a portrait, investigators can take a closer look at similar suspects or, conversely, rule someone out from the list. The detectives turned to a company called Parole, which conducted such research. Soon, they prepared an approximate portrait of the killer. He was a man of African descent, but the investigators could not find anyone resembling him among all the people who were even remotely involved in the case. Parole prepared 2 portraits. One showed what the suspect might have looked like in 1980, and the other in 2017. Both images were published in the media, hoping to get new leads. Robin's relatives also hoped to finally learn the truth. They decided to offer a reward of $10,000 for any information about this person that could help find him. The police received several leads, but all led nowhere. The identity of the real criminal remained a mystery to them. Despite this, the investigators and Robin's relatives were not ready to give up. In 2020, this case was included in a list of unsolved murders that received additional funding. By that time, a new DNA analysis tool was actively used, allowing for the identification of even the most distant relatives of the DNA sample's owner. For this to work, there had to be at least one person related to them in the public or state DNA databases. Robin's killer's sample was sent to Parole experts, and they began the wait. It took several months to study all possible relatives of this criminal, trace their genealogy, and finally identify a suitable suspect. As a result, the detectives finally had a name: 71-year-old Phillip Wilson. However, the research results were not proof of his guilt. The police needed to obtain his DNA and compare it with the sample found in the victim's apartment. They learned the man's address and began surveillance. Considering that by law a person is not obligated to provide their DNA sample, the police often resort to certain tricks. They usually try to obtain an item the suspect has contacted, such as a water bottle or cigarette butt. Once obtained, the investigators send it to experts who can extract a DNA sample. The detectives did the same with Wilson. After acquiring an item with his DNA, they sent it to the laboratory, and the experts established a complete match. 4 decades later, they finally identified a likely murderer, and on February 24th of that year, he was arrested. The man denied his involvement in the murder, but the evidence spoke against him. The police also took his fingerprints, which matched those found on the victim's windowsill. Exploring his biography, detectives discovered a lot of interesting information. At the time of Robin's murder, the man was 31 years old and lived just a few streets away from her complex. Moreover, Wilson was a regular visitor to the donut shop where the victim worked. This confirmed the early police theory that the murderer was the same unknown stalker who botted the girl at work. The man had no serious criminal history, explaining the absence of his DNA and fingerprints in the databases. After the arrest, preparations for the trial began, which dragged on for several years. The trial only started in 2022, and by this time, Wilson and his lawyer had prepared a new line of defense. According to it, there was a consensual relationship between Phillip and Robin that night. The man then went home, after which someone else entered the girl's apartment and killed her. Regarding the suspect's blood at the crime scene, his lawyer insisted that Wilson had injured himself at work, and the wound reopened while he was at Robin's home. The prosecution considered this version of events absurd. First, the victim was not romantically involved with anyone. Moreover, she complained about a strange man harassing her at work, likely Wilson. She was annoyed by his behavior and insistence, and there was no question of any affection. Second, no DNA traces of other men were found in the victim's apartment. It would be strange to assume that Wilson left his biological material, blood and fingerprint, while the killer left absolutely nothing. Moreover, if the suspect's lawyer is to be believed, the girl willingly engaged with him even though she had not made the bed, which lacked all bedding. Wilson's defense also tried to point to another suspect who could have been the murderer. This was Maria's former boyfriend, with whom she lived at the time. By the time of the trial, the man was already deceased, and the lawyer used this fact. He tried to convince the jury that the man was aggressive, threatened Robin and her sister, and also broke into the victim's apartment. However, none of this could be substantiated. Therefore, these statements did not significantly influence the trial process. As a result, Phillip Wilson was found guilty of murder. His sentence was announced on his birthday. The man received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He is currently experiencing many health problems, so his time in prison is unlikely to be long. The victim's relatives thanked the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close. Her sister admitted that she still feels guilty because Robin moved to California following her. As for the girl Wilson assaulted 3 weeks before the murder, the statute of limitations had expired for this crime, so the man did not receive any additional punishment. However, detectives still wonder if Phillip had other victims. Criminals who commit such heinous acts within a few weeks often do not stop and continue to harm people. It is possible that Wilson did not plan to kill Robin. He broke into her apartment and assaulted her, but the girl saw and recognized his face, as he had repeatedly visited her store. Fearing a prison sentence, the man might have decided to murder her, thereafter restraining himself from committing other crimes.